Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Morgana, and I'm one of the founders of Reset Revolution. And today I'm joined by Sophie White from Zurich. And we're going to be talking about eating disorders and common misconceptions that surround this topic. So, Sophie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Sophie. I currently attend Zurich International School, but I'm originally from the UK. I've recently come to terms with my disordered eating, and although I haven't been medically diagnosed, I would say I have binge eating disorder behaviors and some bulimic disorder behaviors. I've been educating myself a lot on the eating disorders. It's affected me a lot, and it's helped me come to terms with what I've been dealing with. But yeah, there are a lot of misconceptions around eating disorders, and I think it's important to address them and address how everybody who feels that they are affected by this type of disorder deserves to be heard and deserves to be helped.
Thank you so much. I was hoping maybe you could start by outlining for our audience that maybe don't know as much about it, what an eating disorder is and the different ways that it can manifest itself.
So an eating disorder is abnormal eating behaviors that usually come from, they can be lots of different things, but they usually come from other psychological problems or traumas or things like anxiety, depression, abuse, bullying as well. And they can come from struggles with your body image. And that's actually the first misconception of eating disorders, because it's often viewed as something that comes from obsession with how you look, even though it's seen as something that stems from vanity and gluttony as well. If you talk about binge eating disorders, it's usually more of it can be a coping mechanism for those other feelings you have and other kind of mental disorders you're suffering from, or it's also a way of regaining control of your situation. If you feel like you cannot control what's happening in your life and your stress, then it's something that you can strictly focus on. And it's also, I guess, a way to distract yourself from your environment and your other emotions. And something I've experienced with binge eating disorder behaviors is that it's like a way of filling yourself with something that you're missing. If you're not really understanding what you're feeling, it's kind of to suppress it or to fill it, so you'll try not to think about it. And there's also lots of different types of eating disorders that some are more recognized, like anorexia nervosa or bulimia. It's got a lot of information on the media now, and people are very outspoken about it. But there are also ones which are less common and kind of misunderstood. And one of them being the binge eating disorder, that I myself thought it was just a case of greed and lack of control, when really it's not the root of the problem. And it's important to educate people around us, but also ourselves, of what it's really about.
Yes, thank you. I think you really outlined that really well. I mean, being a teenager, I know about eating disorders, I know what they are, and I've heard a lot about them, but you don't always think about what you just mentioned, that it doesn't stem from vanity or wanting to look a certain way, but rather to have control over your body, over something in your life. And I think that's what's interesting, but also so disturbing about about eating disorders, because it's not only your relationship with food, but it's your relationship with yourself and your relationship with your environment that generates all these other issues. So you mentioned this one misconception about eating disorders being that it's not about vanity, but rather control. Are there any other misconceptions that surround this topic, and why are they so harmful?
I think one really important one is who is affected, because of course, if the root of the problem is things like what external things like bullying or trauma or mental health issues like anxiety or depression, they're all things that everybody experiences. And that's why eating disorders can affect anybody. And that especially means groups like so men, they don't have much recognition for having eating disorders. Minority groups, especially it's in the Western world, people don't take their eating disorders seriously, and they're often misdiagnosed, and their situations aren't taken seriously by doctors, and this is usually racism within the medical system. And also people who trans people, because they often suffer from, so this sometimes are affected by body dysphoria, and that can, not being happy with your body can often lead to eating disorders. So these are all really unrepresented groups, and it's all this idea of the eating disorders being for rich, skinny white girls, and there's everything is wrong with that statement, because anybody can be affected. It's not even about money, or because that usually, talking about money just makes it look like if you have the time to worry about your appearance, then that's what it's about. And I think going by this, the Eating Disorder Foundation's theme this year was everybody has a seat at the table. So everybody can be affected and everybody deserves to be helped. I think that's really important to recognize, that it can affect everybody.
Thank you so much for outlining that for us. I think it's really interesting as well, the concept of the representation of who has eating disorders. Oftentimes, the only times we see it being represented is in TV shows, and it's usually represented in a very toxic manner. And it's usually the white, skinny, rich girl. And I think that the concept of only this being represented in the media, even though the representation in the media is horrible, it's negative in itself, because it completely excludes this whole group of other people that are also suffering from this illness, and maybe they don't think it's real just because they don't see it being represented. At the beginning, when you were introducing yourself, you mentioned how you are not diagnosed. So I was wondering maybe if you wanted to talk more about how it's difficult to be diagnosed, how it's difficult to like talk about this or be taken seriously, what your experience has been with this.
So I actually chose not to be diagnosed because I think sometimes it's important that eating disorders are now being treated more seriously as a specific disorder, but sometimes it can be misinterpreted to being a sort of disease. And the root of, since the root of eating disorders are more of a psychological thing, I think it's hard to assume that going to get diagnosed and going to seek medical help will really fix anything. I think it more comes down to exploring what your emotions are, what your experience are, and how this affects and how you really feel. And of course, there are situations like, especially with anorexia, that it's important to seek medical help because you need some sort of dietitian person to help you get back on track of eating regularly as you're malnourished. But I think specifically for me, if it's a constant obsession of thinking about food, the idea of being told what to eat again, I think would just trigger myself more. And I have had an experience where people haven't taken me seriously for my disorder because I haven't been diagnosed, or I've been pressured to go be diagnosed. But in the end, it's your decision and your feelings cannot be invalidated. And especially, I mean, I'm really privileged in the position I am. I could go seek help if I wanted to, and it's accessible for me, and I could go on my own or with someone if I wanted to. But lots of people don't have that access, and just because you don't have the access to those resources can't mean that what you're feeling is invalid. And it's important for you to trust yourself. And if you speak to a counselor, maybe at school, or a friend or a therapist, they will understand what you're feeling and they'll help you get through it. And you should never invalidate your own emotions.
So from this, you would more suggest rather than being diagnosed unless it's absolutely necessary for your physical health. You suggest more having someone that you can talk to. Because though like you don't need maybe like a dietitian, I think having a counselor, a therapist, sometimes an adult, or someone you can lean on, like a good friend or a sibling, that's better for eating disorders and things related to mental health, such as this one.
Yeah, it's more about personal choice and what you think is best for you, because obviously everybody experiences it differently, and everybody's kind of tried different ways to get better at different stages, and it all kind of depends how you're feeling. But I think it's important to talk to someone, and also not to depend your need to seek help, or not to allow yourself to seek help only if you have a diagnosis, because that's just that in the end it's just a label. So
I think that's something really important to note. And it's important to note also to give everyone the respect they need. So if someone comes to you and they say, look, this has been my experience, I have not been diagnosed, but this is my experience, it's still a valid experience because diagnosis or not, that's what happened. So to speak about your experience, how has your eating disorder actually affected your personal life or your school life?
so it actually affects pretty much every aspect of your life, especially because food is a very central thing, because it's part of your need to survive as a human being, and which is unfortunate in some ways, but it's a constant kind of thought about what you're eating, and it's always a constant kind of calculation of what you've previously eaten. How much are you allowed to eat next time? Or I have refrained from the calorie counting aspect, even though that did come up previously and I stopped myself after a while. But it's really easy to fall into those patterns, and especially that it's healthy eating is very popular in the media, and it's very celebrated, and people talk a lot about calories, and it's on restaurant menus and it's on food packaging, and it's really easy to kind of fall into that, convincing yourself it's just for your general health, not to kind of progress this eating disorder. And another thing is it makes you have really low self-esteem and not have a good relationship with your body, which often makes you upset, and I couldn't concentrate in school all of the time, or concentrate on my relationships anymore with people, because I was really distracted or upset. And I had developed some anxiety from it as well, that it can be really difficult in some situations if I'm previously thinking about it, or I'm being triggered by what someone has said. But I have been very lucky, I think, not to be subject to self-harm. Often comes from an eating disorder, or to have extreme malnutrition where you're really physically unwell. So yeah, it can break down a lot of things in your life.
Yeah, I feel like that mental reminder, it's maybe something we take for granted. I mean, I speak for myself, that I take for granted not having a complicated relationship with food, but it is a constant reminder, and it is a lot of what we base our social events around, like dinner parties, lunch parties, brunch, and just putting myself in your shoes or trying to, and thinking, okay, I organized a lunch with my friends, but I'm going to be thinking about what I'm eating constantly. That's just going to take away all my energy that I have to actually spend time with my friends. So I feel like that is a very important aspect, and something really important that people that are not suffering from an eating disorder should keep into consideration when around their friends or when around family members. So what suggestions would you give to people that are struggling with their relationship with food? Do you think there's a way out, or how have you been finding your way out?
So there is a way out. I believe there is a way out. And I think the most important thing is to believe that your feelings are valid and you do deserve support. Whatever your situation is, whoever you are, of course, whether you've been diagnosed or not, you deserve to give attention to how you're feeling and you deserve to ask someone for help. You don't need to be ill enough. This is a kind of a big concept, being ill enough to seek help. You're always ill enough. You always deserve to speak to someone. And something that helped me was to read into it. I was looking on the National Eating Disorder websites, and also looking, there's lots of influencers out there who talk about body image and eating disorder experiences or eating disorder recovery. Of course, you can fall into the trap of finding people who are romanticizing eating disorders, so just to be aware of that. But I think educating yourself and kind of breaking down stigma for yourself at first is really important, because sometimes there are things you feel but you can't quite express, or there's something that you don't realize that you're feeling that's actually linked to having an eating disorder. You think it's kind of detached, but really all kind of bundles into one thing. And then it's important, I think, to seek help. That's always really important, whether it's from friends and family, or if you feel uncomfortable talking to them, which has also been an experience of mine. You do not have a duty to speak to any of your friends or family, even though they're close to you. You don't have to. It's completely your choice whether you talk to somebody in your family or professional help. I chose professional help more because I wanted to kind of discuss what I was feeling, or I think because eating disorders are fairly, well, anorexia is fairly recognized. So I know that my family in particular has been really freaked out that what if I become anorexic, and what if it all goes downhill really fast? And for me, the idea of people being very aware of what I'm eating would stress me out even more. So I chose to speak to some professional help, and that's helped me a lot with understanding what's going on in my head. And and then lastly, it's to be patient with yourself, because I think as you start exploring where this eating disorder comes from, you might unlock doors to different problems you have been ignoring or suppressing, and you have to give yourself time to work through it. And it's okay to give yourself time, and you don't need to rush through any of it. And I mean, it also won't be something that's an easy fix, and there will be ups and downs as with everything. And if you kind of seem to be relapsing, that just to be patient and kind to yourself and not be frustrated with yourself. And yeah, I think that would be really important to help you continue getting better, even though it's not linear, but you will feel better.
I think you put it really beautifully, especially the part of being patient with yourself. I think in every aspect of our life, we have to be patient with ourselves, especially in these years, these like youthful years. It sounds like such a cliche, but it's really like these are the years where we're trying to figure out where we fit in the world and where we fit with ourselves. And we can't force that. We have to be patient and see it through and see what happens. You were mentioning seeking help with friends or family members. How would someone help someone has what suggestions could you give as to not be a cause for relapse or a pedantic reminder to eat that actually causes more harm? What suggestions do you have?
Well, I think something that would really, really touch the person or help the person through would be to just validate their emotions, because speaking out in the first place is really difficult, and it's important to recognize that even admitting it to yourself takes courage, and talking to somebody else takes even more courage. That it is a very stressful and vulnerable situation. So no matter what you want to question or what you want to kind of check, or you're kind of in disbelief, it's important to validate their emotions and not be skeptical and try kind of question things, because that will usually kind of put the person down, and then you feel like, oh, I probably shouldn't have said anything, or oh yes, I am overreacting, or oh yeah, it probably isn't true, or any of those emotions. You just need to refrain from judgment and to give the person space and to just really listen to what they're asking for, because even though you might believe that the best decision would be to monitor what that person's eating and or remind them to eat or tell them not to eat, it really is very triggering and difficult for a lot of people going through eating disorders, and to just take a step back and to listen to what they're saying, because in the end that person will know best what they want or what they think will help, and just to show unconditional love and support, because especially since eating disorders seem to be such a kind of misjudged thing, and if the person believes it comes from vanity or gluttony, it's like embarrassing and scary to have an eating disorder. So to just show that they're still accepted, and it's okay, and you're there for them. And I think in general we need to educate ourselves and to break down these stereotypes, because it's really harmful for the people to be struggling with their emotions to believe these stereotypes, and people helping them to believe these stereotypes, because it all becomes a miscommunication and nobody knows how to help each other anymore. So yeah.
Thank you very much. I think you really explained your own personal experience, but also the experience of so many other people out there. And I think this was a really interesting interview. So thank you so much for joining us
Thank you for
today.
having me.
And yeah.